So, Daniel, something that I noticed, which really kind of surprised me, but I kind of knew what was going on, is the developments with UCCF. Now, I don't know if you know much about UCCF.
No, I know
haven't actually.
nothing. Tell me,
Okay,
what does it stand for?
so UCCF is a University and Colleges Christian Fellowship, and they are a national group who assist Christian unions. So in universities and sixth form colleges and maybe in schools occasionally as well, they assist Christian unions, which are groups of Christian students who get together to pray and worship and evangelize. They assist them in their task. And in many ways, UCCF are a very, very influential organization, although many people haven't heard of them. And the reason that they're so influential is because they're working with, a lot of the time, the future high profile Christian leaders of tomorrow, especially in universities which produce high caliber students like, Cambridge and Oxford and so on. Now, the UCCF, I'm not going to get all the details about this right because I haven't researched it extensively, but I know that two of the directors of UCCF, Tim Rudge and Richard Cunningham, Richard Cunningham's the top dog, they were suspended as directors. And they have recently released a report about what's actually been going on there. But the report is actually quite vague. It doesn't actually say what has happened. But essentially, there's been accusations of inappropriate practice from a legal perspective. And I think there have been questions also about a culture and an atmosphere which has been, well, let's say less than superlative in terms of Christian virtue. One of the things that really struck me about the Premier Christianity article that I read is that legal concerns were raised by so-called staff workers who were saying that the employment practices of UCCF were illegal. Specifically, when staff workers are employed, they are told that they are to remain with the organization for a minimum of 3 years and no longer than 5 years. Now, many staff workers have pointed out, and it says that they actually a group of them contracted lawyers to press this case. They've pointed out that that is actually illegal because you're not allowed to employ somebody for a set period of time and then tell them that they are to leave the job. The only way you can do that is if the job comes to an end completely, whereas these jobs were not coming to an end. They were the staff workers who were simply being made to leave and being replaced by other people. Now, the reason I find this so interesting, Daniel, is because I was a staff worker for UCCF when I was when I was in my early 20s. I was a staff worker for UCCF for a year, and I was my eyebrows are really raised because when I read this, because that is exactly what people were saying whilst I was a staff worker there.
What, now, you mean that they were complaining about this?
Staff workers were saying that it was an illegal practice. People were aware of the fact that there were legal question marks around getting people to leave their jobs after 5 years when the jobs themselves are not coming to an end. It was just UCCF's preference that the staff workers wouldn't stay that long because they wanted to keep things fresh. Now, in saying what I'm about to say, I would say that the only reason I'm even thinking about this is because I read this thing. It's not something that sort of affects me anymore. It's a long, long time ago. And I forgive the people who did what they did to me. But at the same time, I think it's sufficiently long time, and this stuff is in the news anyway. So I thought I just tell a little bit of my story. I won't go on and on for ages about it. And like I say, I wish these people the best, and I hope that they've I hope that they recognize as a result of what's going on that the inappropriateness of their behavior. But essentially, I was 22 or 23 when I was employed as a staff worker by UCCF. Now, when you're that age, you don't really know anything about life, especially if you've been at university for the last 4 years, which I had. And I was brought to a new city to work with the Christian unions in the city. I was excited to be in Christian ministry. There were challenges for me, but I didn't really feel like it was the right job for me. Also, the the ostensible salary of the job is £18,000, 18,000 pounds. But the crucial aspect of that is that you are required to raise £6,000 yourself in the donations of, you know, churches and family, friends, and things like that. That was, I genuinely tried my best to do that, but it was really tough. Part of the reason it was really tough because I was in the kind of church where it wasn't in the culture to give to organizations like UCCF for various different reasons. Over the course of the year, that became increasingly an issue. And not to put too fine a point on it, but essentially I was threatened on a number of occasions that they would take my job away. And this is in the context of them telling me that I had to stay for 3 years and I would have to leave after 5 years. So the message to me was essentially, you have to stay this long unless we say you're not staying this long, and we'll take your job away when we want to. So it was very clearly said to me. Over the course of the year, I was offered a job working in a church. I didn't have to raise any of my salary. I would work with students, and it was clearly a much better job for me. And so I decided to leave UCCF. When I told the people at UCCF about this, they said some very, very nasty things to me, which are still lodged in my mind. Bear in mind, I was 23. You know, I wasn't married. I was living by myself. I'd moved to a new city. I had basically no money. I'd moved there for them. They're paying me 12 grand, you know, expecting me to raise the rest of it. But they said they were basically, you know, questioning my character, telling me how I'd let them all down. This because, you know, they want you to stay for 3 years. Now, Richard Cunningham and Tim Rudge are the two directors who had been suspended. I remember having a phone call with Tim Rudge in which, when I told him about this, he told me that I had wasted the time and resources of the people of God. Those are the specific words that he used. And I found that comment to be like absolutely devastating. I really, really did. It caused me a great deal of hurt and other things. I don't want to name the other person who said nasty things to me, but because that person isn't a director of the organization, and therefore doesn't have to take the same kind of responsibility for these sorts of things. But the culture of bullying, of just, to be honest with you, worldliness and ungodliness, I don't, as I say, I don't want to say too much more because I don't want to betray anyone's confidence, but that is absolutely real. And my hope is that UCCF will reform and that it will adopt more godly practices. The thing about the money, I felt at the time I had a significant question mark over it when I got there and started to do it, because to be frank, the way it seemed to me was that UCCF should pay its staff properly, and if they don't have the money to employ full-time staff workers, then they should employ fewer staff workers and not put that kind of pressure on young vulnerable people to raise their own salary, to raise £6 grand of their own salary if they simply don't have the resources to do it.
Modern day slavery, isn't it? Really? Without being too hyperbolic.
Well, I think it's exploitative. I think it's exploitation.
Over 3 years, you're asking someone to raise £6,000 a year.
Yeah, so, a maximum of 5 years.
And that was what, that was like
13 years ago or 14 years ago.
So it's probably more now. It's probably more like £30,000.
Yeah.
So you're putting that pressure on them. I mean, it's extraordinary, actually, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
Are they generally a hard up organization? Or
well, I mean, this is what I'm saying is like the impression you're given is that, oh, you know, we don't have money to make ends meet and everything like that. But this is the point I'm making, Daniel, is they must have some money because they're able to pay the 12 grand. So why don't they just employ fewer staff workers rather than stretch themselves so thinly? To be honest, I don't know what their current employment practice is, but it seemed to me to not really make very much sense to do it in that way. Surely it would be better to have fewer staff workers and to pay them properly than to force them to raise part of their salary themselves. And again, you know, it's one of these things where you might say, well, why did you take the job in the first place? And fair enough. I took the job knowing what it entailed, but at the same time, I was young. I didn't have any experience of doing that kind of thing, and it put me in a really vulnerable position, particularly when they started threatening me, which is essentially how they sort of that was their answer to try and motivate me, was to threaten to take my job away. So to me, what that's doing is it's creating a situation in which they are trying to make the organization sort of have a greater stature and a greater influence than the resources of the organization actually allow. And I don't think that's a great situation to put people in, to be honest with you. And I hope they're not doing it anymore, but I imagine they probably are.
Let's hope that never happens to you again. And you never put yourself, Jamie Franklin, in a situation where
you know what, Daniel, the irony about this is that, like, I've actually got really, really good at fundraising as I've got older. It's just then I just had absolutely no idea what to do. I was like, I just couldn't do it. And it was really, really hard, and it was a psychological torment to me. And then I got offered this other job, and I thought, well, they're threatening to take my job away anyway.
So that's also the part of, maybe it's my paranoid mind here. There's part of that is a way for an organization like UCCF to ring fence the kind of candidates that they want to take on, because they're mostly going to come from the bigger mega churches rather than little St. Saviour's down the road who have 20 quid in the collection on a Sunday and could never ever do this.
Yeah, there may be something of that,
but it colors, doesn't it, the kind of people that you're going to get.
Yeah, you might say as well that there might be a better way of doing it strategically. Like, if you think, well, what we want to do is kind of like have maximum influence, then having slightly higher paid roles and more strategically placed staff workers might be a better thing to do anyway, because it will be more attractive to high caliber people. I mean, there were some fairly high caliber people actually in my experience, very high caliber people who were there. One guy I knew at the University of London, the people at Oxford and Cambridge were very good. But generally speaking, if you pay people properly and you treat them decently, you'll get better people. So, as I say, Daniel, it's funny because I was talking to my wife about this, and she was saying, "Oh, it's like the Mike Pilavachi thing, isn't it? It's like you're like one of, like these people have been coming out and saying, I was, me too, Mike Pilavachi, blah, blah, blah." And I read the UCCF thing, and I thought that is genuinely, like, I was genuinely mistreated by UCCF. Like, they actually genuinely mistreated me, and this story is actually true. So it's funny, it's not. I suppose, like, the lesson for me is, like, we should take it seriously. Not take it seriously all the time, but we should be discerning about, when somebody says, "Oh, so and so did such and such to me." I mean, it does genuinely happen, and lots of Christian organizations do treat people very, very badly, and it's shocking, but it's reality, I'm afraid. And it happened to me. I'm just grateful to God that He's been so faithful to me, and I am where I am. He's provided for me and helped me, given me everything I need, and helped me, in a kind of zigzag path to the place that I am now. And I'm very, very happy. And also, I'm happy to have had that experience as well, funnily enough, because it taught me a lot about a particular kind of world that I didn't have very much experience of. And I just pray for Richard Cunningham and Tim Rudge, and I hope that if they do have things to repent of, that they repent of them, and as I say, I have absolutely no ill will towards anyone associated with them, and all I want for them is the best for them in terms of their mission, helping students evangelize on campus and everything like that. So it's water under the bridge as far as I'm concerned, Daniel, but at the same time, the truth does have to be spoken, 14 years after the event on a podcast sometimes.